Welcome to this Learning Lab webinar, Creation's Cure-All, the what, why, and how of tree planting, in which we'll learn about why planting trees is so important for our watersheds, our communities, and our souls. I'm Collier Braun-Greiner, Program Coordinator with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And this webinar, along with all of our monthly Learning Labs and past recordings of those, are all part of a continuing education for our Faithful Green Leaders training, but they're open to everyone. If you haven't taken our training, we do encourage you to do so, to build or strengthen your own green team, to take action to heal God's creation. Let's join in prayer together. I thank you, God, for this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees, and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. That is a poem by E.E. Cummings. Amen.
Amen.
And now it's my delight to introduce Al Todd. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us about your experience with forestry and especially with watershed stewardship. Al is a current board member of IPC and former executive director of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Take it away, Al.
Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. There we are. Right there. Very good. From the beginning.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm really happy to be here and to talk about one of my favorite subjects, trees and forests. As Collier said, I'm with the IPC board right now. I had a lot of my career in the U.S. Forest Service. I'm a hydrologist by profession, and I've always worked at that intersection between water and trees and forests and their relationship. So it's really neat to be able to talk about trees, forests, and the health of the Chesapeake Bay. First of all, I want you to think about this. So think about if we had an engineer out there and we challenged them to build a machine that could do some things for us, that could filter pollution from the air and water, that could take CO2 from the atmosphere and store it, could cool our homes and cities and reduce energy consumption. And not only that, this machine could do all these things without using any fuel, at minimal cost to maintain it, and could be delivered to you in so many colors and sizes that everyone would want one installed in their neighborhood. All right, well, it's a neat way to think about it, but of course you know that we're talking about trees. God, the master engineer, has created probably the most useful, valuable, and helpful ecosystem we have to support our human life, frankly, on this planet. So we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of trees, how the land has really changed in the Chesapeake watershed in terms of forests. We're going to talk about why trees are so critical to restoring the bay and in terms of guaranteeing us the health of watersheds that we want. And we're going to talk about some of these next steps, both planting and conserving forests. And this is really just an overview because we could dive so deep into all these subjects, but we're just going to kind of touch the surface. It's important to remember that the benefits that this most marvelous of God's creations in nature provides to us are things that benefit us. They enrich our world. So this is just not an esoteric benefits that accrue to nature. These really accrue to us. Whether it's the building materials we get from wood, and wood is used in thousands of things from your toothpaste to the interiors of your car, the places we recreate, we all want to sit under a tree and have lunch or have a nice wooded campsite. And biodiversity that produces really the benefits in a healthy world. Clean drinking water, about 70% of the people in the US get their water. The cleanliness of that water is preserved by its source of forests. Wildlife, of course, trees, cleaning the air and regulating our climate. We know that a wooded neighborhood versus one that is not wooded can be as much as 10 to 15 degrees hotter in the summer if there are no trees. and the benefits it accrues to us in terms of our health, in terms of breathing in our cities. And then spiritual, because trees and forests also help to heal us. I don't know if you've ever noticed that in any hospital, if you look around at the paintings that are on the walls, all of the paintings are paintings of nature, trees, flowers, and so forth, because science has proven that people heal faster when they have the ability to see and be reinforced by nature. But it's not just those esoteric benefits. Trees are good for us, for our business, for where we live. They increase property values. They attract people to businesses. People linger on streets that are wooded far longer than anywhere else. Apartments rent faster. Office space has more productive workers, and so forth. Less crime is found in neighborhoods that are well treed. So these are all benefits that accrue to us from trees. And if we get all these benefits essentially for free, I guess you'd ask yourself, why isn't protecting trees and expanding forests a much higher priority for all of us, for our decision makers, for builders, and so forth? Well, I think once established, trees are passive. You know, they provide all these benefits to us without us really having to do anything. And so we tend to start to take for granted the benefits that trees provide. And as the old saying goes, when you start to take things for granted, those things you have been granted may get taken away from you. And we've all seen that happen. So how have forests changed in the Chesapeake Bay watershed? Well, when John Smith first arrived here in his ships in 1604, this is pretty much what almost all of the Chesapeake Bay watershed looked like. Originally, most of the landscape was forested. But of course, the landscape has changed as people began to use the land in terms of farming, in terms of development, in terms of flood control, grazing, and so forth. And as population, which has now doubled since 1950 in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, the forest landscape has changed. If we go way back in history to that time in the 1600s, as you can see, well over 95% of the watershed was forested. Had to be cleared to feed us, to produce the building materials and fuel, which was primarily wood up until about the 1900s. So we cleared a lot of the land, and as land was abandoned, it grew back. But now we're on a trend again, based upon development, of beginning to lose forests again. And while a lot of the headwaters of the Chesapeake Bay watershed remain forested, we only have about 54% of the original forest left in the watershed today. And it's not just history. The loss of forest land in this watershed continues, especially in our watersheds and in the tree cover in our cities. In developed areas, this loss is continuing, and since the mid-1980s, we've lost probably 70 to 100 acres of acres of forest every single day since the mid-1980s in just about every state, except, as you see, in New York, which is really a matter of abandoning dairy farms in New York. But the rest of the watershed has continued to lose. And we're talking about almost 1 million acres since the 1980s. And this loss of forest is incremental. That's why we don't notice it, and it becomes significant as it adds up. In the long run, it's really the cumulative effect that really matters to our watersheds and the quality of our streams and rivers and air. So while population has increased, that rise in population doesn't tell the whole story, because these sprawling types of development consume land at about 3 times the rate of population increase. Bigger houses, more square feet used per person, more lawns, more roads, more services to support that growing population. So what does that mean in terms of watershed health? There is a connection between trees and forests and the water quality and the health of our watersheds. In the old days, and we've known this for a long time, but we tend to forget these facts. I love this quote that comes from an old historic document about agriculture and country life in Pennsylvania. And in 1753, this Pennsylvania settler wrote, "Our runs have dried up. Several which would turn a mill are now scarce sufficient for the farm." And the reason is this: when the country was covered with woods, the rain that fell was detained and so had time to insinuate into the earth. And now the trees are cleared and the rain, as fast as it falls, is hurried into our creeks and washes away our soil and makes shoals in them. And hence the creeks told by Mr. Penn to be navigable are no longer so. Water is the product of its watershed. And we've known for a long time that there's a connection between the health of those watersheds and forests. So, but we know what a watershed is, right? An area of land where all water drains to a single point, usually a stream or a river. And we all live in a watershed. But what do we mean by a healthy watershed? Well, a watershed that's healthy, that's functioning healthy, intercepts and stores that rainfall. It has very low surface runoff. In fact, I challenge you to go out into a forest in a very heavy thunderstorm or rainstorm, and I challenge you to find any runoff. In most forests, there is no runoff during storm. They retain and recycle the nutrients. The forest floor and the tree canopy protects the soils from erosion, and they support our healthy aquatic systems. But key, like we're trying to achieve with the Chesapeake Bay watershed, a healthy watershed has the capacity to endure a flood or a heavy rainstorm, and any damage that occurs, it can repair itself. These are the measures of a healthy watershed. So let's not forget how vast the Chesapeake Bay watershed is. So in orientation, if you haven't seen these maps of the Bay watershed, obviously from just south of the Finger Lakes all the way down to Norfolk at the mouth of the bay, and from West Virginia to Delaware, this is a 44 million acre watershed, a very large area. And the bay itself is a very important estuary, as we know, but it has a very interesting characteristic that is unique around the world and makes it so difficult to deal with the restoration of the bay. These are a lot of the major estuaries around the world, and this is a graph. I won't spend too much time on it, but it's a ratio of the area of the watershed to the volume of the water. And if we go back and we think about that Chesapeake Bay, we have actually the bay is big, but it's a very small body compared to the vast size of that watershed. And so this ratio, here I'll click this, there's the ratio for the Chesapeake Bay. This is why the bay is so hard to clean up, because everything that happens on the land changes the quality of the water in the bay. So forests become a very important thing for us to think about, because even though they are the majority of land in the watershed, they produce a very small amount of the pollution that we're concerned about, nitrogen and phosphorus in particular. Agriculture, which is a smaller portion, produces almost half or a majority of the pollution, and urban areas, which are a very small portion, produce almost half as much as agriculture. And we know that although agriculture is our biggest source of pollution in the watershed, our developed areas, our urban areas, are our fastest growing source, primarily due to stormwater. And this is just another way to look at it. This is a way to look at the health of the aquatic system, the things that live in our streams and rivers. IBI is a measure of the health of the living things in a stream. And as forests and riparian forests, the ones along the stream, decline, so does the health of the living things in our creeks. And as impervious area increases, so does the decline in the living things in our creeks also occur. So bottom line is that a watershed's health is really linked to the amount of forest and trees in a watershed, especially those that are critical, like riparian areas, for example, and then how we care for the age, the health, and how we care for those forests as well. A watershed's health is clearly linked to it. Many of you have seen this before as to what happens when we clear forests and develop watersheds. We change those indicators of health that we just talked about. What happens is not so much when we change from a green filter to this developed and impervious gray funnel, the water's not infiltrating in the ground like that farmer noted in 1753. When the rain falls, it runs off and carries with it the pollutants into our waterways and erodes our streams and so forth. And I think the key is that we're finding out as we look at the costs of this, you know, communities all over the Bay watershed are engaged in spending billions and billions of dollars on stormwater treatment to essentially just replace the services that forests provided for free. Now, and in areas, very urban areas, we don't think of the forest as much as we think of the urban tree canopy, or the tree canopy is what's doing the kind of job that a forest did in a natural area. And in our cities, if we can increase the tree canopy, we can make some significant reductions in the amount of stormwater runoff that occurs that we have to actually spend money to treat the pollutants from. One of the ways we do that, I know IPC is very involved in this, as are many of our congregations, in reducing stormwater using what we call green infrastructure, green approaches that incorporate trees and plants and try to mimic those things that a forest did naturally. That's what a rain garden does. The rain garden essentially mimics what a forest ecosystem does in terms of the soil, in terms of the plants, uptake, and so forth. So we got to get creative. You know, can we start thinking about how to incorporate trees into our development? You know, for example, on cul-de-sacs. What about stormwater ponds, which we're building all over? Can't these have trees? Can't they be more like wooded detention wetlands and systems? You know, yeah, we can plant trees in parking lots, but can we create something that's a more of a functional ecosystem in a parking area as well? And we have, you know, on our roadsides, can we look towards the incorporation of more natural vegetation in these areas? These are all some of the solutions that hopefully we're beginning to think about. But I think the key is that we have to start thinking about trees and forests very much as solutions. Some of the solution to the problem. They're not just a passive, nice thing to look at. We need to think of trees and forests as part of our solution for the Bay. And it's not just planting trees. I'd like to kind of make that point, is that we have to conserve forests when we're developing the land as much as possible. So that involves protecting trees as well as planting them. We have lots of vacant lands that can be reclaimed. I know a lot of folks are working on increasing tree canopy in urban areas, and as I just mentioned, using them in stormwater practices, converting turf areas to trees, for example. And they can be an active part of our solution. IPC worked with in terms of helping to push forward legislation in the state, our Forest Conservation Act, you know, to really kind of think about when we lose forests now, we're essentially stealing them from our next generation, from our children, who are really going to benefit from them. So let's plant trees, but let's also think about how we plant trees. I'd be the first to admit that recreating a forest is tough. We can plant individual trees, but recreating that full set of functions that a forest provides is tough. And we really have to work at it. There are priority locations to think about on your property, for example. If you have a stream or you have a conveyance of water, planting trees near that may be a higher priority. Making connections with existing forests that may exist on your property to create more habitat. Using native plants, both fast-growing and slow-growing plants, things that are survivors. We can, you know, certainly provide a list of those that are really the survivors. And thinking about both the overstory trees and the understory trees, things to think about. Planting in clusters. A lot of folks like to plant individual trees, you know, 50 feet apart, and that canopy is going to be beneficial, but we can create far more benefits when we plant those trees and try to recreate a group of trees that will support each other in the long term. And then lastly, I just want to mention, it doesn't end with planting a tree. We have to think about the fact that that tree will not really provide all the benefits we really want from it unless we can keep it there. And many trees will take 5 to 10 years to really become established in a location. We have to protect it all that time from the weed whackers and the mowers, and oftentimes from deer and other threats. And just as a closing thing, in addition to all the benefits we've talked about, we should also think about trees and forests as insurance. It's a little bit of insurance for our watersheds. As we think about climate change that will bring more severe storms, higher temperature extremes in our cities, stresses on biodiversity, and our need for more open space and nature. Forests are kind of a bit of insurance for some of the things we may see in the future. Uh-oh, whoops, something happened. Anyway, let's go back to here. There we go. I don't know what happened. Here we go. I love this picture. It was taken in Poland, actually. But so every tree has value, and every tree asks for our care. Protecting and planting trees is an important and sacred step we can all take, if not for ourselves, for our children. And like they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So get started today. Thank you. Stop share.
Thanks so much, Al, for your service to IPC and for sharing with us about why trees are such an essential contribution to the health of our waters, our communities, and our souls, showing us why we can call trees creation's cure-all.
Thank you.
We're going to share some examples now of how leaders are engaging their communities in tree planting for the health and healing of their local environments. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Doris Terrell. She's a dynamic organizer and board chair of the Broadway East Community Association. Thank you so much for sharing about the good work that is happening there in your community to heal the local environment. So next slide.
Are we ready?
Yeah, go ahead, Anna, advance the slides.
Can you see the tree planting Broadway East Community?
Yes.
Do you want the next one?
Yeah, go ahead and tell the story about your engagement there. It should be the group. There should be a group picture of the folks sitting around planning for the Green Print program, and talk about that.
I don't think I'm seeing it on this side, but I can go forward talking.
Okay.
Can everybody else see it?
We can, Ms. Doris.
Okay, great.
Is that
welcome.
good?
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not
Now
coming.
we're back in presenter mode.
Okay, I'm going to switch back to.
Yeah.
It's okay. I can
Yeah,
start.
that shows.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks good. Go ahead, Ms. Doris.
I can start talking about what goes on in a 95% African American community, as we would call the urban setting. We are challenged by a high heat index and poor air quality. And the benefit that Al has just finished talking about, trees, we recognize daily what it's like not to have those trees present. We have little or no tree canopy. So as we struggle to change that, we also understand the health impact of not having trees, how it changes what happens for the people who live here. So of course you get people with the high blood pressure issues, the anxiety, the depression, and of course then we're faced with a cocktail for violence. So people who are in the high blood pressure mode, we know ultimately might struggle with some kidney failure and severe heart disease. So for us to have trees, it's a life-saving benefit. We recognize that, and we are here to say to you, we need your assistance and all the other people who recognize the importance of bringing trees to these urban settings. The internal struggle for our communities happen to be the lack of understanding why we need trees. So educating the community is a task that you must take on if you want them to understand why this tree needs to be here. They will struggle with you about, I don't want to do the leaf cleaning. Not understanding we are living in this asphalt jungle and the impact that it has on you as you become severely depressed. Children are affected by the lack of greenery. We know that from an educational point of view. If we give children an opportunity to see life daily, just the greening of a street changes your perception and how you respond to people. So the whole mental health component of how do we make people happy is important, just from tree canopies. Yeah. As we look across the city and compare to other communities, there is tree canopy. So we're not so sure about why we ended up with no trees. So now we're in the mode of planting trees when and where. We're so thankful to Blue Water Baltimore and Darren for his intervention. Then Bonnie comes along and says, I can help you do this. So we're grateful again that there are people who are willing to be here. Mm-hmm. I guess for me as a community-based leader, I'm still struggling with how this happened. And if we all understand the benefits of planting and having trees in place, can we expedite that process? Are there other people willing to help us to learn more about why trees are so important? And if they are there and ready to give us this information, we're ready to receive it. So again, I thank Al for telling us about the benefits of trees and what it does for a human being just to have that connection.
Mm-hmm. And Doris, we're showing now a slide that shows what an alleyway could look like before it's greened. And the goal is for this neighborhood to have greening alleys as well as street trees, which is part of this plan.
We also have the greening of the alleys, and I'm not sure because I'm still not seeing the slides, and it may be something that I'm not doing from the technology side. But we have on the table a new project called the Field of Colors, where we're trying to get people to better understand what it means to have a changing of colors in the area. Planting of flowers that also will lift your spirit, give you a better idea about the outcome of life. We need something new. You know that each day you hear the violence in the city. There's research out there that shows the planting of trees, the introduction of greenery will help people have less depression and less likely to move towards violent outcomes.
And we also have some other slides of showing the actual tree planting that occurred, some young people planting the trees and playing music out there. You see the street trees that were planted in these tree pits along the street. So all of that's part of the efforts that you're orchestrating there.
We also, once we realized that we had 947 lots and 600 of them belonging to the city, we created a greening plan. I don't think the slides for the greening plan were there because it was like 17 of them, but in the greening plan mode, we knew that we must do something to have a greater impact on the lifespan of the people here and to look at how we could change the violent behaviors that we were looking at.
Thank you so much, Ms. Doris. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more about your story and your progress to greening your neighborhood in the future. Thank you. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on right now, but
thank you.
Thank you so much for really sharing all the good work that you're doing in spite of some really serious challenges, but there's obviously hope that's being grown in your community for the future.
We thank you for having us.
Well, next up, we have Margie Lance, a member of Dayspring Church in Germantown, where Dayspring Retreat Center has 208 acres of woodland, meadows, streams, and ponds, a completely different environment from what we've just heard, with lots of native flora and fauna, those are animals and plants. And so she's part of the Earth Ministry mission group there. And so take it away, Margie.
Good evening, folks. By the way, this is all property of Dayspring Church, not just the retreat center. The retreat center is on the property, as well as the Wellspring Conference Center, some residences in our church. So it's a very multi-purpose property. Yeah, we're in Germantown, but Maryland, but we are surrounded by development. And we bought the property in 1954 when it was rural, believe it or not, in Germantown, and farmland. So the woods, but now we have about 150 acres of our 200 and plus that are wooded. But why more? Well, trees like us are mortal, and some die out, some get infected one way or another. So we undertook a tree planting of 50 trees. Well, let me add something too. Of our 200 plus acres, most are in conservation. I want to tag on to what the first speaker said. Yeah, conservation is important to us, and we hold the land to be very sacred. So we were adamantly protected. So to do this major tree planting, we bought trees from the Department of Natural Resources nursery, which is available to anyone in Maryland, but they are seedlings, which means they're about 12 to 18 inches tall. So they're just little babies, and they only come in groups of 25. Now they're all native, evergreen or deciduous, and they also have some native shrubs. So we purchased 25 red maples and 25 red oaks. And then we got busy because this was going to be a big undertaking. So we have our team of buildings and grounds folks who kind of circled around and started organizing. And we, first of all, we had to kind of obviously set the date and few details like that, like any group would have to. And then we had one of our team from the director of the retreat center who said he would undertake the volunteer part of it. Wonderful, that took care of that. But this was during COVID, so we had to somewhat limit our numbers. Then we, for tree planting, there's a lot involved. There's not just the trees, but there's the tree protectors like Al talked about. And we have a heavy deer pressure in our area. We needed the stakes for the tree protectors. We needed the tools for planting. And we had to plan for watering because this being a big property, water taps are not right adjacent to where we needed them. So volunteers were set, the volunteer invitation was sent out. And we included invite to Kolya. And she offered to do a tree liturgy at the beginning. So,
we're doing it in the next slide.
Well, I'm waiting for it.
Yeah. I don't know if Anna can advance it for us.
I feel like my, I apologize, my screen's frozen as well.
This is the night for it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
There you go.
There you go.
Wonderful.
What you're seeing is the front of the original farmhouse, which is now our church. And up on the steps is Kolya and a member of our church, Jean Brown, as they lead a liturgy from those of us scattered about safely. And that was a beautiful way. This happened on May 1st of this year. And then we divided into teams of 3 because we're planting in 3 areas. So we had a group of 3 trees in one area, 10 trees in a totally different area, and 37 trees in the third area. So you can see we already have equipment, tools already divided up. That's on the left side, and that wheelbarrow, the white, that's our tree protectors. And we had a leader for each group, which was very, they were already prepped about how to do the tree planting. in an appropriate way. So each group paired up and headed out to their assigned areas. So and each leader was instructed on what to take, who's going to go with them, etc. So the liturgy was beautiful. And then we set off, and this shows the area right by the retreat center that planted 37 trees in groups. There's on the right, someone's putting the tree protector on, and someone on the left is digging for the next one. But you can see all the way on the left side, near that white thing on the ground, that's about the size of a tree. Mm-hmm. See how small that is? So folks, don't plan on having full tree shade for a long while. But this area, like any area, I mean, it's not just digging a hole. The area has to be prepped depending on where you're doing this. We had a lot of weeds and invasives in this area that our building, our grounds people took care of beforehand. Or you got to maybe even in the city to pickaxes if the ground is so hard, which can be. And then we had we had plans for watering, etc. So it was a very blessed day. We had a gorgeous day, as you can tell just by looking at the pictures. And after each area, each group completed their planting, we used the end of Kolya's liturgy and we blessed the trees as a group. And that, to me, almost was the most sacred part of it. We honored the trees and we blessed them for good health as they would bless us with good health as they grow up. So the weather, we did have plans for follow-up watering because planting in the spring means heavier watering requirements than usually in fall when trees are in kind of recession. So that was arranged too beforehand. So they will, depending on the weather, they will get weekly watering as needed. So it was a wonderful day to get 50 trees in the ground on our property in addition to what we already have. So thank you.
Thank you, Margie, for all your work coordinating such a significant tree planting event there at Dayspring and contributing to both the beauty and the health of the local watershed. Thank you. Now for our last presenter, last but certainly not least, is Ann Payne, a member of Friends Meeting of Frederick. And she's also the active member of the Multifaith Alliance for Climate Solutions. So we're glad to have you, Ann, tell about your tree planting experience there in Frederick with the StreamLink program.
Thank you, Kolya. I'm really speaking for MAX, which is a small group in Frederick County. MAX stands for Multifaith Alliance of Climate Stewards of Frederick County. And I'm just remembering, Kolya, I think the first thing we ever did as a group was you led us on a spiritual walk down to Catoctin Creek Nature Center. I had kind of forgotten that was our kickoff event. Well, so about 2016, we formed this group, and it was a group of people from different faiths, different backgrounds, who had a very strong feeling about the climate and the dangers that were sort of coming. It was sort of like hearing a freight train and nobody else could hear it or something. That's what it felt like. So we formed a group basically in somebody's kitchen. Now we're a group, we have a large following, but our steering committee is, I think it's 12 people representing 10 faiths. And our mission was, what we really had in common was, it was our faiths, our different faiths where the particulars differed, but we all in our hearts felt the moral obligation to act, to care for the earth and to protect and care for each other and for future generations. So that's what sort of brought us together. And it was an interesting ride. So Interfaith Partners, Anna held our hand at the very beginning. So we sort of grew up under Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake Swing, as well as Interfaith Power and Light, until we got on our own feet. So we picked our name, which I don't love, but that's all right. And then we sort of got our walking orders. What are we going to do? Well, we want to advocate, we want to educate, and we want to act. So it's like, all right, that sounds good. Now, what do we actually do? We had been sharing films between congregations where we would have a film at Quaker meeting and invite people from other churches. And that was fine. But then one of the members is a real tree advocate, and she said, I think we should plant trees. This is Kathleen Rawl. So we said, all right, Kathleen, why don't you get us set up and see what you can figure out and come back. So she came back and said, all right, we're set up. I've signed us up. We're going to plant 1,000 trees. You could have heard a pin drop. I mean, we were all like, it happens in Frederick County. We have a fabulous organization. I don't know if there are other places or not. It's called Stream Links. It's a nonprofit, and their mission is to plant up riparian zones that are degraded in this area, in this county. So we had arranged to do this planning with Streamlinks, and Streamlinks they recruit landowners who own land along streams in riparian zones that are bald, basically, and non-functional, and they're eroding, and the mud is getting into the water, and the water's heated up because there's no shade on it. So they find these properties, talk the homeowners into letting volunteers come in and plant trees, and they provide the trees. So we were really set up with this fabulous group. So we went in there, and we decided to do it 500 trees at a time. And we went into our congregation. So I think of this whole thing, it was more than the 1,000 trees. And we did get them planted in 2 weekends. Yeah, that was maybe the first one. We didn't get quite the pretty weather, but it was all right. We were out there. It wasn't snowing or anything. It was in March. But there's something about this whole initiative that was interesting to me. And that is more than the trees. Going to the churches, do you have that picture, Colia, of the little card that we made to put in the different churches and temples?
Yeah, we just showed it. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Trees for tomorrow. Yes.
Trees for tomorrow. So that was to recruit we need a lot of people. It's funny. I know it was 1,000 trees. I don't know how many people. It wasn't 1,000, but the opportunity to go into all of these congregations around Frederick County and ask for volunteers and explain to them why we were doing that was a project in itself. So that sort of broadened the whole conversation about trees. You can see on that card, every minute over 55,000 trees are destroyed worldwide. It got people talking and thinking about trees. At the Quaker meeting, we're very sort of social justice oriented. And I don't think we were thinking that much about trees, but this started a whole conversation. So we completed that project, and then we decided to join. We've done a lot of other things, but we decided to join in with this annual festival, I guess, called In the Streets, where nonprofits line the streets. It's a ton of fun, and you set up a booth and you talk about what it is you're doing and stuff. And so trees kind of became a theme. We had tree education booths. And so the clerk of York meeting at the time anyway is a professional tree propagator. So she said, well, I'll give you 50 trees. You can give them away at your fair, at your festival. We're like, oh, cool. So I drove up and picked up 25 American hollies in nice size and 25 bur oaks and drove them back to Frederick. And the day of the festival, we went out and we set up the booth, put our big canopy thing up, and we had all our educational material. And we had our trees, which we were going to give away. And the wind started to blow. The sky started to get dark. And I mean, everything let loose. The canopies had actually become weaponized. The wind was so strong, we had to get out of there. So we had given some of the trees to people, but not enough, really. We had to find homes for others. So we met people in the street doing that, and in subsequent years talking about trees. Yeah. But part of this was, what are we going to do with the trees? And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of this, but one of our steering members works with the children at the Frederick Islamic Society. And these little girls in that group wanted a forest on their property. They have this sort of urban property with a mall in front. It's a nice property, but bald on this big hill. And they wanted a forest. So wow, we happen to have the oak tree. So we now have a little Frederick Islamic Society oak forest growing up there. So that was nice. And this picture, so some of them, this one went to the town of Middletown, which is struggling with an 18% tree canopy, which is horrible. I mean, we're very agricultural and developing very fast. So the trees are coming down really hard and fast. So we gave one to, this is a dog park in Middletown, and the people on the two ends, Mark Kearney is the head of the planning commission, and the woman on the right is Cynthia Unangst, and she is the town planner. And the other three of us are Max people with our shovels digging the tree in. So anyway, those trees, by the way, are beautiful that we did. So that was
yeah, Anne, I'm wondering if we can move to your advocacy piece, because this is also
yeah. So the sort of the way this
we're up
thing
against
has
our
grown,
time here.
the way this thing has grown, it went on to Jody Rose from IPC called and said, does somebody from Max be able to take notes? There's going to be a tree conservation ordinance up for discussion with the council, and we want to know what's going on. And could one of you guys listen in on it? So I was the slowest one to say no. So I ended up with very little expertise, but it was fun. I was just going to take notes. Well, anyway, we kind of got swept up in this because it was a proposal for an ordinance. Our tree conservation ordinance was for every acre of forest cut. No, wait a minute. For every 4 acres of forest removed, a developer had to plant 1 acre of those little trees. And you can see the math. There's no way that's gonna work. We were losing acres of forest every single year. So anyway, this was to change that. So now they have to replant every tree that they take out. Basically, it's back to one to one. And the other part of that ordinance was there were different parts of it, but one of the conservation things was that the planning and zoning people now have to consider the importance of the forest in issuing permits, and that's a biggie. So there was a big battle. In short, we won, and Jody and I worked together, IPC and Max worked together, and we wrote a petition, which we circulated through the congregations. We had, I forget how, I never remember numbers, maybe a couple hundred, a lot of signatures anyway. And we got a lot of letters. So again, we were activating people that weren't really focused, but they got really excited about this. They didn't know about the existing ordinance, and then they were learning that could be better. They got really active, and that was wonderful. And one thing that was fulfilling, I guess, was that council actually mentioned there's so many people of faith who feel morally strongly about this issue. And that was cool. And I think it was very influential, actually. It wasn't the usual characters advocating for the usual things. It was like real people and people of faith who were behind getting this changed. So the bill passed, the ordinances passed, and I think we now have the strictest forest conservation ordinances in the state of Maryland. And I believe that it's become a model for other counties. So you want me to stop talking?
Yeah, well, I would say hallelujah, and thank you so much for all the efforts that produce such success, because it is definitely a model, and one that we could all emulate in other counties as well. So thank you so much. Thanks to all of our presenters. Just very quickly, I wanted to put this up so some folks might not know where to get trees. You've heard several people talk about their tree sources, where the trees were acquired, working with local watershed groups, about also programs that your county may have with tree planting. There's a coupon. I'm actually putting this in the chat for everyone. That you can get a $25 coupon from the Department of Environment of Maryland, that if you go there, you can print it out and use it to buy trees at a discount. The Arbor Day Society online nursery, and there's many other sources, but if you are completely bereft of where to go, please contact IPC and we'll be glad to help you out with that.
Polia, don't forget
yes.
the Department of Natural Resources nursery.
Yeah,
They only cost $1 per seedling. $1 per person.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. That was a great example. So now it's time, if we move to the next slide, you'll see that it's time for the Q&A. For what, I know we're at time, but we started late. So with everybody's patience, let's field a few questions or comments from the chat, if you do have any, to ask of our presenters or of your own experience. Just unmute yourself or put your question in the chat. Anybody out there with a comment or question?
I want to say a comment if I can, because I don't like to use chat. Okay?
Sure, go ahead, Charlie.
I was so impressed with what was presented tonight. It's going to wake me up tomorrow morning and I'm going to plant a tree. But I want to compliment everybody that, you know, is trying to do that and everything, because I would love to see Al's presentation, and that is the importance of planting a tree. And I'll tell you, every morning I take my dog for a walk, and one of the things that I do is I hug a tree. So thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Anybody else?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, hello, Pat.
Oh, hi.
Wait, one second. Natalie, can you stop the spotlighting so we can see everybody?
The spotlighting should be off. Do you mean, there we go.
There you go.
There it goes. Yeah, thank you. Little bit of a delay.
Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. So I have a question about the ability of trees to absorb carbon dioxide. And I was told one time that as the trees get older, their ability to absorb carbon dioxide diminishes enormously. And that I found that sort of troubling. Does anybody have the answer to that? I mean, it almost sounds like you have to cut down old trees and keep putting in new trees. So I'm wondering if anybody can comment on that. I mean, it might have been entirely wrong information too, and I kind of hope it was.
Well, it's not entirely false. I'll take a stab at that. The reality is that as the rate of tree growth, slows down, trees use a lot less of all those, elements in terms of putting on growth. But it's a long process. So, I mean, we're talking hundreds of years before those trees are really, and they're always going to continue to, be storing carbon. It's just not at quite as rapid a rate. So I guess if the only thing you were ever wanting to do was raise a tree as a carbon storage, cistern, then you might entertain the idea of cutting them more frequently. But the reality is that there's so many other benefits that older trees provide, not to mention the fact that they are essentially large standing stores of carbon. Once you cut them down, as they decompose, they'll release it as well. So it's a cycle, right? So, but the fact you brought up is to some degree true. So
it's only true. I'm glad it's only true to some degree, because I found it upsetting.
Yeah, right. Well, it depends on what you do with that information, I guess.
Alan, Doris again. Can you just give us a little capsule of what it's like not to have a tree, the negatives attached to that, when there is no exchange of air quality? Can you a small capsule of that?
Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, where there are no trees, obviously the main, like in those communities where you are completely lacking tree canopy, obviously you're losing the benefit of interception of pollutants. The leaves themselves are like a filter system. So they essentially tend to attract particulates out of the air. So essentially where you have tree cover, you have this ability of a filter system that's attracting particulates out of the air, allowing them to kind of drop down or be utilized by the tree. At the same time, you have warmer temperatures, so any other pollutant, things like air pollution or ozone are enhanced by that, so they get worse essentially. And then you have much greater need for energy use because they're much warmer. A wooded street versus a completely street devoid of trees can be as much as 10 or 15 degrees hotter in the summertime. And that's significant in terms of other health problems as well, respiratory problems. So, it's a multitude of things, but without trees, you have no built-in filter system for the air. You don't have that ability to kind of regulate your climate. And frankly, it's just we as humans need nature, and without it, you beg a lot of different other social problems as well. So they all add up. So a world devoid of trees, to me, is a very unhappy place. So
can't forget the benefits underground too.
True.
Let me say something.
Soils.
Yeah, this is Charlie again. What Al was talking about, and the question was, one of the things I want people to know about, and if they want more information, they can contact me or Collier or Bonnie. But a friend of mine, Rabbi Nina Beth Carden, is passing, or is not passing, but she's trying to promote a environmental justice amendment for Maryland. And she needs as much help as she can to do that, okay? And there are already 2 bills, one in the Senate, one in the House in Maryland General Assembly. So if anybody would like to have more information on that, I'm trying to get it to have our church support that as well. And I think that, let's face it, everybody deserves clean water and clean air.
Yes, that's the environmental human rights
Right.
initiative.
Human rights.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, how about we take one more question, and then we're going to call it to a close. And
Collier, there's some questions in the chat.
Yes.
There's like 3 questions in the chat.
Let's see here. Well, we answered some of them. About some folks asked about a tree blessing. I posted the one that we have on our resources, is Al's presentation available? We will make that available.
Lisa asked, what are good overstory trees for a parking lot strip? I don't know, Al, if you can answer that. What are good overstory trees for a parking lot strip?
Yeah, well, I replied to somebody else too regarding street trees. I think I'm a fan of native trees, so whenever we can, but I'm also a fan of using good performers. So there are several oaks that are the best performers. Red, pin, and willow are probably the most stable and useful and reasonably fast-growing trees in a parking lot. I'm a huge fan of sycamores, although not everybody loves sycamores, but they also grow quite rapidly, as a matter of fact. Maples, of course, native maples are a favorite. So I say I'm more a fan to stick with the native trees if you can do it, but always, every location is different. And so I always highly recommend somebody to, have somebody come out and consult with you to make sure you got the right tree in the right place, because the soils are going to make a difference. What might be overhead in terms of power lines or anything else. So it's not, I certainly would go with natives, but there's a whole lot of choices to make for the right location. Yeah. And then somebody asked how much of a buffer is needed for a stream, and that frankly would be a learning lab all to its own, I think. But
Mm.
And then I just, Stu Stamen asked, is the state identifying land to plant 5 million trees in 10 years?
Mm.
You know anything on the state level, how they're trying to locate land to plant on?
well, yeah, I'm not as familiar with that. That may be is that a new goal? But they're always looking for, the problem we have is the lack of land to plant trees on that isn't agriculture at this point in time. So that's why in urban areas, the best place to plant a tree is on everyone's individual property. And I think most cities realize that on private, most land is private land, and most opportunity for planting trees is on private land. So we need to help people plant trees on their property.
Yeah, Stu commented that it was a 2021 legislation this year. With whether or not it passed is whether, I'm not sure if it actually passed, but if it was considered, that's then.
It did pass.
Okay.
It did pass. And I think that part of that, and I'm not sure how much of this got ripped out of it, but there was a lot of detail in it about focusing on planting in areas that do not have trees, particularly urban areas that do not have trees. And I know they were trying to rip things out of that because that's more expensive to go in and tear up cement to put trees in.
Right.
But that was the intention, and at least it did pass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think, yes.
Would you like Councilman Stokes say good evening to your team?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
How's everyone?
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you for joining us.
I was on the side listening, get my Tree 101 class. I'm glad I didn't have to pay for it. I appreciate the information. Last Saturday, a friend of mine, he is from England, and that's all. He's in Baltimore, and I really got my Tree 101 last Saturday, because now I look at trees and I learned from him, you can plant a tree, but if the sidewalk is still cement, the tree is not going to survive. You're going to have to open that sidewalk up so that the water, and then I learned about tree diapers. I didn't know tree had diapers, So it was all new to me, and I would just listen to y'all, and it's much needed, not just in my district, but throughout the city. And we just need to educate the community how important it is. And unfortunately, about 3 years ago, I got about 10 trees, maybe 12 trees, 6 on each side of my block that never had trees. So I have the tree trimmer I bought about 2 years ago. I never used it. So since I got my class last Saturday, 101, now I understand you got to cut the bottom of those branches so the tree can grow taller. If not, so now I'm an expert. So I'm trying to tell experts about what I learned. But I'm looking forward to working with Doris and working with you guys and getting more trees planted in Baltimore, especially in my district, which is the 12th district. It's actually my second term on the city council. My history go back. My mother had 8 kids, 2 sets of twins. I'm the second set. I work for Kirk Smoke. I work for Lawrence Bell, the president of city council. I work for Councilman Carl Stokes, who's not related. He's been on the council for 10 years. And I'm very fortunate to represent a district that I still live in. So I'm really passionate about what goes on in the district, especially about the trees. So I'm going to keep learning more, and I appreciate y'all reaching out and working in my district so we can plant some more trees. And I always be selfish. I represent the 12th district, so only the 12th district. We might do a little bit.
Councilman Stokes, we will bring as many congregations and members of congregations to help you in District 12 and maybe a couple other districts too.
Yes.
Okay, well,
And
let's work first,
Well, thank you so much for
nice
being.
you guys. Nice talking to y'all, but I was on the side listening to everything.
Great.
Well,
it sounds like you're going to be a great spokesperson for tree planting in your neighborhood.
Yeah, all I talk about now when I see trees, I'm like, oh, that tree will die because they didn't cut that. And you start see it dying at the top because there's no leaves. So I'm learning a little bit here now.
All right. Well,
thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your service to your community. Well, I think we're going to call it to a close here. I just want to send you forth before we end this recording and say we hope that this webinar, this learning lab, has inspired you to go forth and do likewise from the examples we've heard. Blessings of health and well-being to you and your local environment. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And those of you will stay on. In just a moment, we'll talk about that.